Um, my name is Beth Rapp-Young, and I'm very happy to talk about our project. We are in the midst of creating a searchable online edition of Samuel Johnson's famous Dictionary of the English Language. When this dictionary was first published in 1755, it was a worldwide sensation. It quickly became the English language's most influential dictionary, and it's still consulted frequently. Not only is it useful for illuminating literature from the 18th and 19th centuries, but it's often cited in legal contexts because it was the standard dictionary when the founding documents of the United States were written. We're building on the success of a site that was created by an independent scholar who gave her site to us at johnsonsdictionaryonline.com. By April 15th of this year, that URL will switch from the current legacy version to a beta version of the new site, which will feature a complete searchable first edition. We hope you'll check out the new site when it launches in just a few weeks. When I describe our project to other people, I'm often met with the question, what is there to do besides getting a computer to recognize the print? As you might guess, there's lots to do, and hardly any of it has proceeded the way we expected. We look forward to discussing the challenges we've encountered, some solved, some less so, in the hopes that our experience helps others and that you might share similar experiences that we can learn from. Also, we'll talk about what the project has taught us about Samuel Johnson and about the dictionary he created. We divided our talk into 6 general areas. I'll describe them very briefly, and then my colleagues and I will discuss each of them in more detail. Source materials. Johnson's dictionary is in the public domain. It's remained in print in some form since 1755, including in digital format. Even so, we encountered challenges in securing a usable transcription and facsimile images and a portrait of the author. Contributor training and workflow. Our project has been fortunate in attracting people to help with creating images, editing XML, and researching names and titles in the dictionary, among other tasks. To work effectively with them, we had to resolve challenges of both training and workflow. Quotations research. Johnson's dictionary famously includes quotations to illuminate word usage. We developed 2 methods for researching the sources of his quotations, and we found that the research sheds light on Johnson's own processes. Automation. The quantity of quotations, about 120,000 of them, and words, about 43,000, contained in each edition of Johnson's dictionary creates a challenge for processing. We worked with undergraduate computer science teams to improve the efficiency of our quotations research and image creation tasks. Digital markup. Digitization goes beyond basic transcription. It requires designing and implementing a standard markup approach. However, Johnson's dictionary is somewhat unwieldy and not as standardized as modern readers might expect. Not only that, our standards still needed to be customized to our specific project goals. Database and interface. The goal of the online dictionary is to create a reliable reference tool, and as a tool, the searching capabilities will be the most important. We also need our tool to be flexible for users and sustainable for our institution. We'll discuss each of these areas next. Obtaining source materials. As I mentioned before, Johnson's dictionary is in the public domain, frequently cited, and already digitized in several forms, including a now out-of-print CD-ROM and high-quality facsimile scans at HathiTrust. So it would seem that the conditions are right for us to get the source materials that we need. But we had trouble getting not just a usable transcription of the text, but also facsimile images and a digital copy of a famous 18th century portrait. Starting with the portrait, Dr. Samuel Johnson, it was in the public domain only if we used the entire portrait unaltered. We wanted to use just a detail from the portrait, which required special permission, which the Tate Gallery was willing to allow. But UCF's lawyers rejected the Tate Standard contract because it required us to indemnify the gallery against any liability and to defend it in British court. So, what liability could arise from our reproducing a detail from an 18th century public domain portrait, you may wonder? Well, I couldn't think of anything, and neither could anyone else I spoke with. I suggested various workarounds, including asking a colleague who was traveling to London to photograph the portrait for us, or hiring an art student to recreate just the detail that we wanted. And all of those ideas were rejected. In the end, we found an 18th century mezzotint copy of the portrait in the public domain at the US National Gallery of Art, and we'll use a detail from that instead. The dictionary facsimile images that are online at HathiTrust turned out to have too many restrictions for us to use. Fortunately, the Warren N. and Suzanne B. Cordell collection of dictionaries at Indiana State University promised to provide high-quality scans to our project free of charge within 6 weeks of the funding announcement. Unfortunately, a series of unhappy events, including staffing reductions, equipment problems, and so on, delayed the scanning process and resulted in their being able to supply only lower quality images, which didn't meet all our needs. Then the pandemic. Fortunately, the University of Florida was able to step in with high quality scans that we received just about a week ago. And finally, the transcribed text. We originally planned to pay for a professional transcription, but the cost increased between our grant application and the award. Then we hoped to use a transcription from an out-of-print CD-ROM edition, but the copyright on that was really cloudy. Then we tried optical character recognition with help from Dr. Jorge Fonseca Cacho of the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, who researches OCR, but those results required a lot of post-processing. And then we were contacted out of the blue by Ian Lancashire of the University of Toronto, editor of the Lexicons of Early Modern English project, who gave us a complete transcription of the 1755 edition with XML markup. Working on these issues reminded me of how Johnson must have felt when he needed source materials for his dictionary. His own library has been described as copious but miserably ragged, and he couldn't afford to buy all the additional books he needed, so he had to borrow from others, which proved difficult because he tended to mark them up. So his work, like ours, relied on the generosity of others and support from libraries. So, what lessons did we learn from all of this? First, start with the library, finish with the lawyers, and talk to the lawyers only if necessary. All of our challenges were resolved with the help of libraries, from getting copyright advice to locating actual copies of what we needed. Librarians are oriented towards promoting research. Lawyers are oriented towards avoiding lawsuits. If I had shared more of my work with librarians earlier in the process, I could have avoided some frustrating roadblocks. Network as much as possible. Be generous when you can. Sometimes I felt like I talked to everyone on the planet about these issues, particularly the transcription. But the more I reached out, the more help we got. And the transcription challenge was resolved because one of the consultants on our project, David Antoine Williams from St. Jerome's University and the University of Waterloo, mentioned us over lunch to Ian Lancashire, who donated his transcription. I hope in the future we can be as helpful to other projects as other people have been to ours. And finally, available is not the same thing as accessible. This dictionary has been available for centuries, but that doesn't mean it's truly accessible now. And this matters not just to us as we seek the resources to create our site, but to anyone who wants to use Johnson's dictionary. For example, a recently published book claimed that Samuel Johnson did not consider the words exercise and play to be worthy of an entry in his celebrated dictionary. But that's untrue. Johnson's dictionary has 3 entries for exercise and 3 entries for play. I think what happened, or it's likely that what happened, is that this author used the search function at our legacy site that searches only about 9% of the dictionary to arrive at this wrong conclusion. The more we can make Johnson's dictionary truly accessible, the better for everyone. Next, Abigail Mooreshead will talk about managing contributor training and workflow.
Thank you, Beth. As Dr. Young mentioned, I'm Abigail Mooreshead, and I'm in my 3rd semester interning with Johnson's Dictionary Online. And today I'm going to discuss how we've navigated accomplishing some of the large-scale tasks related to digitizing the dictionary. Several aspects of this project require steps that can be completed by non-specialists, like editing the XML tagging of the words, doing biographical research on the names mentioned in Johnson's dictionary, and cropping images of the words in the dictionary. To complete this work and to hopefully provide a valuable learning experience for students, we've developed a system of recruiting and training volunteers among the UCF community. And while having volunteers to work on the project is fantastic, it does create the challenge of how to best accomplish the dictionary work with accuracy and precision when you have as many as 10 to 15 people working on the same task. And this is a challenge that Johnson himself faced. Specifically, he was tasked with figuring out how to organize an effective workflow between himself and the 6 assistants that he hired to help him with the dictionary's compilation. His initial process for compiling the dictionary involved him and his 6 amanuenses finding and copying by hand the nearly 120,000 quotations that would appear in the dictionary. According to James L. Clifford, Johnson would find quotations that exemplified the correct usage of a word, mark it, and have an assistant copy it. Initially, the assistants placed these quotations in notebooks that had a predetermined spot for each word, but eventually these notebooks became so unwieldy that Johnson was forced to scrap his compilation process and use loose leaf pages instead. So distributing work among a team and creating an effective streamlined process is something Johnson did throughout the whole writing of the dictionary, and is a process he had to make significant changes to as he went along, and that's something that we have faced as well. So to train our volunteers, we initially began in the fall of 2019 and then the spring of 2020 by holding weekly workshops on campus where everyone participating was in the same classroom together with instruction from Dr. Young and Dr. Mathis and Dr. Dorner on their assigned task. And at that point, they were working on image cropping, quotations research, and those things we'll talk about in more detail later. And they were working on proofreading the XML rendering of the dictionary. And having a designated space and time for these workshops allowed us not just to train the students, but to have them working with us in person to solve any problems or answer their questions as they were working, rather than having to have students send an email, wait a response, and then find out that every other volunteer was having the exact same problem or dilemma. So we were able to develop questions and solutions in real time together. But with every other aspect of education, because of the pandemic, we were required to make our work virtual last spring. So we have since done smaller group trainings via Zoom or done written instructions sent over email. We've also at times used course shells in Canvas for students to join so that they can have easy access to training materials and instructions and an easy way to communicate with us. Another challenge with regards to having this many different people working on one project is how to store the data and move the files. One of the largest tasks our volunteers have worked on is standardizing the XML coding of the 43,000 words and adding missing XML tags. This is a process we've automated many aspects of, and it no longer requires students to download files locally. But our initial process that we devised last spring required students to download a code editor and the XML files, and then to upload those same files to a shared drive after they had edited them. In this instance, we found OneDrive to be an effective way to store and share files, as all UCF students have free access to it. We were able to keep the work organized by having a file folder named for each student that they would then upload their work to, and that Dr. Young and I could then access. And as the one who was assigning each student the set of words they would be working on, I used an Excel spreadsheet to track which words had been assigned to which students to avoid any overlap in labor. Once the students had completed their work and we had checked it over, I would then move the files from the shared OneDrive to a separate drive shared only among the dictionary team members for longer-term storage. For our current volunteer project, we have students from class Dr. Young is teaching who are researching the biographies of the myriad historical figures mentioned in Johnson's quotations. We've used Zoom for training, as everybody is these days, in addition to having written instructions and web courses. And we have a shared Excel spreadsheet on OneDrive where students keep track of their work and store the data that they locate on each person they research. But this particular project has proven to be more difficult to accomplish with OneDrive, as students have run into issues being able to edit the shared spreadsheet. So we are likely going to switch over to Google Sheets to do this. Another drawback of OneDrive that we have encountered the longer we've been doing this is that anyone who is not in our organization, so Dr. Mathis, for instance, being at the University of Regina, have more hoops to jump through to log into the shared drive. So this technical issue goes to show that what may work for one project may not be ideal for another, and staying flexible and having a backup option, in this case Google Drive, for the type of technology or platform being used is always a good idea. In closing, we've learned a lot through trial and error along the way, and of course our initial vision for volunteer work did not include having to navigate a pandemic, but we've discovered that distributing labor across a group, when organized well, can be an effective way to complete a project like this. And now I will turn things over to Dr. Carmen Mathis to discuss quotations research.
Hello, unmuted. Thanks, Abby. I'm Dr. Carmen Faye Mathis at the University of Regina. The University of Regina is on Treaty 4 land with a presence in Treaty 6 on the territories of the Cree, the Saulteaux, Dakota, Lakota, and Nakota, and the homeland of the Métis. In order to make our online version of the dictionary not only a place to look up words, but also a research object in and of itself, we knew that we needed to trace and tag the quotes that Johnson uses to illustrate the usages of words so that scholars could search for them and within them. These quotes come from well-known literary works like Milton's Paradise Lost and Shakespeare's plays, as well as from more obscure places like medical treatises, books on natural philosophy, chemistry, botany, etc. Many of Johnson's quotes are missing parts of attributions, and some are misquoted or misattributed entirely. So we needed to assess accuracy. Since there are about 120,000 quotes in the dictionary, we knew that this would be a task that required support from student researchers and volunteers, as Abby has just talked to us about. Along the way, we gained insight into the importance of the quotations themselves for the dictionary structure that resonate with newer findings about Johnson's own methods in the near decade he spent working on the first edition. Early accounts of Johnson's methodology from James Boswell and Sir John Hawkins emphasize Johnson's use of other dictionaries in the compiling of his word lists. But if that was the case, if Johnson began with the words and then searched for quotations with which to illustrate them, then why would Johnson include a quote such as the third one in his definition of provocation? So we can see here that the third meaning is, I know not whether in the following passage it, that is provocation, be appeal or incitement. So he's unsure about if this quote from Hooker is the first meaning or the second meaning of provocation. One answer, which aligns with recent reassessments of Johnson's process, is that the quotations themselves drove the dictionary's lexicon, with Johnson perusing literature in search of words to define before and in addition to comparing his list with other published dictionaries. The plausible account of Johnson's general procedure offered by Eugene Thomas and James Clifford suggests that Johnson began by reading cursorily through printed books and marking with a lead pencil those passages which he wanted in his dictionary as illustrations of particular word usage. His method was to underline in the text the words which was to be illustrated, write the first letter of the word in the margin, occasionally crossing out words in the quotation if necessary. He then passed the books on to an amanuensis, who copied each quotation verbatim. Two things should strike us about this account. First, the vocabulary of the source texts drives the development of Johnson's lexicon. If Milton uses it, Johnson defines it. Second, even at this early stage, Johnson was modifying quotations to suit his purposes. In the first year that we began working to bring Johnson's dictionary online, we tested two methods for checking the accuracy of quotes. What I call the holistic approach was to go through the dictionary in alphabetical order by word. This involved close reading the image files of Johnson's dictionary while proofreading the transcription, then checking the quotes in order, as in the example of provocation here, a quote from Bacon and one from Smith and then one from Aleph, etc. The primary aim was to determine if the quote belongs to the cited author and work, and we would also note major changes to the original text. The pros of this approach are that it builds in proofreading of the transcription as you go, and it feels like detective work. It keeps you engaged with the actual dictionary, and by the end of a session, you've been all over the internet and databases tracking down obscure references. The cons of this approach are that it requires expertise that a student researcher might not possess, and even for an expert, it is not terribly efficient. The second, single author approach involved creating spreadsheets with all the entries already tagged with an author name or derivation of a name. So John Milton, Milton, Milton's, Milt, etc. Johnson wasn't very consistent in the way that he refers to authors, along with their associated quotes, and then checking quote by quote against an archive of the author's works. So Paradise Lost, Paradise Regained, etc. By starting with such low-hanging fruit as Milton, whose works are easily searchable on sites like Project Gutenberg, much greater efficiency is possible. It is also easy enough to teach student researchers how to check quotations for accuracy using this method. Students can quickly check to see that a quote exists in the place that Johnson says it does. In some ways, the single author approach is the shadow of Johnson's method as Thomas and Clifford describe it. If student researchers are akin to the amanuenses, then they might seem to reassemble the source texts cut out and cut up by Johnson with his lead pencil. In another way, though, the mechanical nature of the process of toggling between spreadsheet and online sources, pressing the shortcut key for find and zooming into the result, is fundamentally at odds with Johnson's approach. By abstracting the quotations from the dictionary itself, this method has the major con for the student researchers and myself of being monotonous, even robotic. It is an approach that aims to systematize something inherently unsystematic. Indeed, feeling like a robot tracking down quotes suggested to us that it might be possible to automate some of this process, as Amy Giroux will describe next in her presentation. Nevertheless, what has become clear through our work is the degree to which Johnson's literary tastes drove not just the quotations he chose, but the words that make up the dictionary itself.
Thank you, Carmen. So my tasks for this project included trying to automate some of the more substantial, time-intensive tasks. Our university's computer science department has a 2-semester course called Senior Design, which the undergraduate students have to pass to graduate. It's considered their capstone course. So at the beginning of the first semester, sponsors pitch projects to the students, and then the students pick their top 5 choices of interest. And then the professors mix the 2 of those together and assign students to the various teams. Now, these are complex tasks. They're not easy programs to create. It has to be something with some depth so the students learn project management and the tasks themselves. And the students spend their first semester analyzing the requirements of the project, deciding on how to implement the project itself, producing extensive design documentation, and also beginning to prototype the project. And then the second semester is used to complete the programming, finish all the final documentation, and then hand off the system to the sponsor. I've worked with 17 teams over the past 5 years on various projects associated with the Center for Humanities and Digital Research where I work. And we have 2 computer science teams who have helped us specifically with this Johnson's Dictionary project. And as Carmen had discussed, the quotations that Johnson used were not fully complete or accurate. And since there's over 100,000 of them in the first and fourth editions of the dictionary, we wanted to try to automate that research as much as possible. So I pitched this specific task to the senior design students in the fall of 2020, and I was assigned a team of 5 students. They've collected a corpora of texts from online sources such as Project Gutenberg, which Carmen had mentioned, and many other ones that have OCR and available text for research. And they've created an algorithm that searches for the best match, and then they store potential matches in a database. And they've created this interface where a user can search within the potential quotes, either by headword or author or the title of the work. And then they step through the quotes to see which the algorithm had selected as the highest probability of being the correct one. But it also allows the user to say, no, that wasn't really it. This is the correct one. So they can check that if necessary. And then once the quotes are processed, there's going to be an export function that will be used to bring the correct information of each of the quotes into our database, the actual dictionary database, so that when researchers use our site, they can actually search within Johnson's dictionary by the quoted author, the quoted work, or the specific quoted text. The second senior design team was a group of 4 students, and they worked with me over the spring and summer of 2020. And their task was to help parse dictionary page images into actual separate word images. There's approximately 43,000 words per edition of the dictionary. And some of these words, not only do they span the columns within the dictionary, some even span multiple pages. So the idea with these multi-part words was to append all of the pieces together so that a single word is contained in a single file. So the program the students wrote for this, it uses computer vision models and a lot of machine learning algorithms to complete the various steps in the process. So it first tries to determine whether the page image has a warp in it. These students were using the lower resolution images. So some of the scans you could see over time, the page itself actually warped. So the image has curved text within it, and they were trying to algorithmically adjust the image so that the lines of the text were actually straight on the page. Then the algorithm would detect the columns that are on the page and split the columns into 2 separate images, and then it parses those column strips into separate words. And then the intent is to use optical character recognition, or OCR, to read the headword and then rename the file for that headword. So as I mentioned, the team had the images that were lower resolution, so their process had less accuracy than we would have hoped, because it had some issues determining where on the page the headword started. So I stopped that process, trying to use their process, in the summer of 2020. But since we received the high resolution scans very recently from the University of Florida, thank you very much, I'm in the process of getting this process set up again so that I can start parsing these new page images into the Word files. And each of these Word images that are going to be created by this process, we're naming them the same as the TEI encoded definition, so that the user interface that will be discussed in a few minutes here, that they can match up the TEI markup and the visual image on the site and then display them side by side. And now Will Dorner is going to discuss the challenges of doing the actual markup.
Thanks, Amy. Hi, I'm Will Dorner, XML analyst for the project, and I'll briefly describe our journey of digitizing the edition that will be available online soon. This includes everything from obtaining computer usable text, representing that text so that it's usable by our chosen database platform, and ensuring that each word now and in the future adheres to the same usable structure. Digitizing and representing a text using modern markup standards is a systematic process that cannot be approached without a plan. Besides the most basic requirement of a transcription to work with, whether manual or via optical character recognition, developing a rigorous markup schema is a necessity for usable structured data. Part of the challenge in a project of this nature is determining a tag set that is a markup vocabulary that we want to use that is both robust and flexible for the future. For this purpose, we chose to build a schema based on the guidelines of the Text Encoding Initiative, or TEI, that Amy mentioned. This vocabulary then has to be followed for each headword in the dictionary. Consistency and predictability across documents is necessary for the whole system to function. Johnson's dictionary, while following its own system and structure, does not always lend itself to the rigor required of an XML document system. As Beth mentioned, we were fortunate enough to receive from the lexicons of early modern English at the University of Toronto a fully encoded TEI transcription of the 1755 edition. But even this windfall presents its own set of complications. While it gave us a complete text to work with that largely solved our earlier problems with OCR text, the markup we received placed an emphasis on representing the physical layout of the text, which was not the focus our edition embraces, and so did not fully match our markup vocabulary requirements. Other challenges from this text included the introduction of typographical and XML errors, miscoded or entirely omitted foreign characters, and an inconveniently large file size that all had to be corrected. Digital tools, including extensible style sheet language transformation, or XSLT, and XPath restricted document searching paired with regular expressions have proved invaluable in the creation of our data. XSL especially has allowed us to analyze the source data, break it into usable chunks, and translate much of the pared down TEI conformant markup we received into a robust set of dictionary information that conforms to our schema and powers our database. Of course, we've mentioned how more traditional digital standbys like shared spreadsheets cannot be overlooked. For those issues that cannot be automated, it is difficult to overstate the importance of a tabular list of headwords and their issues that need to be addressed. In short, systemization is a requirement for a project of this undertaking, whether in the 18th or the 21st century. A system of automated markup transformations, find and replace regular expression routines, and spreadsheet tracking has allowed us to create a product that adheres to the necessities of searchable digital edition. Overcoming each of these challenges has demonstrated how different, but also how similar, our approach has been compared to the 18th century creation of the original text. Next, Connie Harper will discuss the project's implementation of a document database to handle this structured data.
Okay, so I'm Connie Harper. I'm the software developer for the project. So now that we've got XML tagging and image capture worked out, we need to design the website. Our key architecture goals were to create a sustainable architecture with robust technologies. And we also needed an architecture that would enable us to create a powerful and flexible search engine. So we chose technologies that are tried and true. The LAMP stack is a standard setup for web applications. We chose a platform and libraries that are easy to maintain. The challenge was to find a database to hold the XML version of the dictionary. We chose ExistDB as our database, primarily because it allows us to store the XML files as they are created. As our volunteers and professors tag and proofread the data, it's stored directly into the database. ExistDB also provides a Lucene full-text query engine that allows us to search content by tags. And we do use MySQL for some of our searching and also logistics like our login and statistics and saving searches. So after we determined our underlying architecture, our most challenging part of the user interface was the search page. So we are providing a complex search, but we also wanted to make it easy to use. And we wanted to display a lot of information on a limited screen space. We created a flexible interface capable of Boolean searches, and we allow the user to search almost all the tags in the XML. We are able to search variant spellings and use regular expression searching. In order to do this, we're combining the capabilities of MySQL and the ExistDB Lucene search engine. For example, we didn't want to add alternate spellings to the XML markup of Johnson's dictionary So we chose to create a MySQL database table that holds headwords and alternate spellings. When searching headwords, we can check the MySQL table for alternate spellings. And we use ExistDB's Lucene engine to handle most of our search needs, like searching phrases, ignoring stop words, searching content by tags, and supporting regular expression searching. We are using MySQL, their SoundX feature, for the ability to search phonetically. To help with ease of use on the user interface, we're providing feedback for certain events on the search page. For example, because the user can add different search criteria rows, we're providing the number of results for each search on the line as the query is returned. So if you see a particular row that is not returning results or returns too many, then you can refine your search and add another row or change the search criteria. After we combine the results of the Boolean search, we're displaying the number of results that satisfy all the criteria. Another challenge that we had was that there's lots going on the search page. We have search criteria, search results, rendered XML of the selected word, and the image of the word from the dictionary. So we added the ability to hide and show different portions of the page. For example, you could hide the list of results or hide the criteria or image, so you can free up some of your screen space. Our XML rendering of Johnson's definition is pretty faithful to the print version, but we added some space and maybe changed a little bit of the font size to make it easier to read. So with the choices we made, I hope we've created a digital rendering of Johnson's dictionary that makes it easy to search and study and provides long-term benefit to the community of scholars and students and to the public.